It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve, and the whole family was at church for the midnight service. Everyone except Sam. This church wasn't really his thing. So he stayed at home, and he's looking out the window, gazing at the snow. He suddenly realized he hadn't fed the animals yet that day, and so he rushed out, lit the heaters, fed the animals, and walked back to the house as quickly as he could. Because it was so cold, the snow crunched beneath his feet. That's North Dakota cold. But along the way, Sam noticed some little sparrows. Some with their feathers ruffling in the bitter wind looked like they were frozen to the branch. And others had fallen to the ground just flopping around on the snow. And he feared that they might all freeze to death. So he tried to shoo them toward the barn, but every time he got close, they flopped away. They were afraid of him. To the birds, he was a giant, scary-looking creature, so he tried to think what he could do to help them. I wouldn't scare them away if I could become like them, he thought, which was an idea he immediately dismissed as silly. And finally, an idea came to him, and he ran to the barn and he got some seed. And he laid it out in a straight line right to the front door, and sure enough, one by one, the birds hopped their way into the barn, eating seed all the way. And once inside, they flew to the rafters where they were safe and warm. Now, unbeknownst to him, his initial idea illustrated a big theological word: incarnation. If only I could become like them, I could help them. They wouldn't be afraid. And that's the Christmas story. In Jesus, God became an ordinary human, born into the midst of the lowliest of situations. His mother made to walk for days because a brutal tyrant from thousands of miles away decreed hardship on every citizen in his occupied land. And they arrived in a strange city, homeless, looking for any kind of shelter. An innkeeper did the best he could, and she gave birth in a barn full of animals and placed him in a feeding trough. All of which is to say, this was not a birth in a palace of a powerful royal family, but born vulnerable to the elements and as messy and desperate as any human experience could be. Now that's Luke, the journey to Bethlehem ordered by a Roman emperor with stories of shepherds and angels and barn animals. And in Matthew, it's quite a different story with dreams and a star and magi and a journey to Egypt to escape a murderous, paranoid king. And in Mark, you may already know, there's no birth story at all. And then we have John with a kind of third birth story, a cosmic origin. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14, John further clarifies, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. I just love that line. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Incarnation. Now, in some interpretations, the word means wisdom. More commonly, the word is interpreted to mean Jesus. But if Jesus is the Word and the Word is God, well, is Jesus God? And verse 18 seems to contradict this. No one has ever seen God. Is God the only Son who is close to God's heart, who has made God known? John is known for his wonderful clarity. He seems to say in one verse, the Word was God living among us, and a few verses later, it wasn't God, but Jesus, the Son, who makes God known. And so Jesus is God, and Jesus isn't God. That's simple, right? And yet the message of incarnation is so powerful because of its simplicity. God understands our human experience because Jesus has been there. our suffering, our sorrow, the injustice that threatens to overwhelm. You know, as the spiritual says, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. God, not a being from on high who looks down judging from a throne, but for God so loved the world, God's very self chooses to enter this human mess. Or is it God sent Jesus to do it? And in this confusion, the church helpfully adds the doctrine of the Trinity. You know how confusing is to say God the three in one, in which Jesus is both God and isn't God? And then add the explanation that Jesus is, this is so helpful, Jesus is both fully human and fully divine, which to me sounds like he isn't fully either one. And if all of this is confusing, even Jesus' disciples couldn't answer when he asked a simple question. Who do you say that I am? J.A.T. Robinson was a major source in shaping liberal Christian theology. In 1963, he wrote, "It's simple. Jesus lived God." Which kind of says both. It's more than saying he's a wise and brilliant teacher, a prophet. And it's less than an insistence that he was fully divine or that he was God. Maybe no, maybe yes. Carter Hayward was a groundbreaking feminist liberation theologian, and she said that Jesus had to be considered divine by the patristic authorities, also known more simply as the Church Fathers, because they had such a low view of humanity. They didn't want to empower people with the example of Jesus, but elevate the necessity of the church to act as their intermediary. Now, 35 years ago, I tried to make this all seem simple and explain my theology in my master's thesis. And I wrote that Jesus was a human so conforming to the will of God as to become divine. Therefore, not born divine, but becoming more than human, not unlike enlightenment or even the Buddha. 35 years ago. It's more complicated than that. As how do I square, in the beginning, the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Yeah, simple. So does it have to be this complicated? What's the point? Why do we ask such questions as how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? When the most pressing issue is how we live God. I mean, not to be God, not to try, not a nirvana to achieve, but to join in the messiness of humanity, God's original purpose of incarnation, to help others find their way into the safety and warmth of a barn on a cold winter night, which is how we find our way. Jesus came to show us how to live God. And in so doing, that's how we become as fully an authentic human being as we can be, shaped by love and forgiveness and grace in a world then and now dominated by greed and violence and retribution and the pursuit of power at any cost to the people born into the most vulnerable experiences any human can have, like Jesus. But still, don't we want to know who was Jesus? But just when we get too sure of ourselves, Carter Hayward wrote in Our Passion for Justice, the people who wished him to be a political zealot found him to be a person of prayerful spirituality. And those who wanted him to be a person of prayerful spirituality found they had on their hands an offensive activist. To those who wanted him to be a Messiah, he retorted, "Get behind me, Satan." And in the presence of all those who demanded he explain himself, he stood silent. Who do you say he is? There's 120 different answers in this room alone. It's wonderfully simple, though. And it's equally wonderful that it's not simple at all, but deeper than we can ever hope to perceive. Always a journey, always deeper. Just like these little cards with a word on them. Simple and profound. So last year we had our first experience with star words, which is quickly growing in popularity in churches across the country as a spiritual practice to begin the new year. And for those unfamiliar, we print out a list of words generated by a liturgical group called Sanctified Art for each person to choose their own guiding word for the new year. But they aren't words we choose for ourselves. They're placed so you can't see them. And we have an option for those worshiping online. You just need to go to our website, missionhillsucc.org, and right on the homepage you'll see a link that will take you to something that looks a little like a spinning wheel of fortune. You click on that wheel and the word will be generated from the same list. But you may ask, why randomly? Why not put the words down and you get to choose the one that you want or that calls to you? Well, last year I picked up my random word and it was listening. And I immediately wanted to put it back and choose another. I thought, I do enough listening already, as if that can ever be true. But I stuck with it, periodically pondering its meaning for 2024. And it wasn't until the 12th month that I realized the word was listening and not listen. And all of a sudden, that shift answered a question I had been carrying around for 6 months. It just suddenly made sense. And the word you picked today may immediately make sense. Oh, yeah. An epiphany on the day before Epiphany. Or the word might be like, what? This doesn't apply to me at all. And maybe it won't. Maybe you'll go through the whole year and say, well, that was a waste. Or maybe you can stick with it. You just put it, on a bedroom nightstand, put it in your wallet, your pocketbook, whatever. If you stick with it, it might just reveal something you couldn't have expected or certainly wouldn't have asked for. So it's simply a word to ponder occasionally, which might guide you in an unexpected direction, answer a question that you've been holding, or maybe it won't. Simple, right? Jesus is God, Jesus isn't God. The question, the answer, best gift is to simply open yourself to exploring some sort of deeper meaning using just one word.